Tardes a todos. I am Maria Rosa Vaquerizo. I'm the CEO of the Andean American Associations, and I would like to welcome each and every one of you for today's program hosted by the Ecuadorian American Association. And we're going to have a very timely conversation, Ecuador's presidential runoff election. We're very grateful to our expert panelists and to all of you for your participation. Few words about the Ecuadorian American Association. It was incorporated in 1932, becoming the very first chamber of commerce for Ecuador in the United States. Our association hosts timely and informative programs throughout the year featuring the leaders of Ecuador and the US. It's celebrating this year its 93rd anniversary. We're very grateful for the interest that our programs generate. Today, we have over 240 registrants. I want to welcome some distinguished participants of today's program. We have supporters and friends of the organization. We have Banco Pichincha Miami Agency. They are a leadership circle member represented by our EAA director, Pablo Vallejo, and colleagues. We also have today with us Bruno Ciuffetelli and Jorge Diaz Silveria from our Andean American Association member. It's the law firm Hogan Lovells. We're very pleased to welcome our good former speakers and distinguished friends. Julio José Prado, Ecuador's former Minister of Production, Juan Carlos Vega, Ecuador's former Minister of Finance, Michael Shifter from the Inter-American Dialogue, Ben Ramsey from JP Morgan, Alejandro Arriaza from Barclays. And we are also honored to welcome representatives of the governments of Ecuador and the US. From the financial institutions, we want to welcome Asobanca, Barclays, BBA, Bladex, BNP Paribas, Citi, Danske Bank, Goldman Sachs, HSBC, JP Morgan, Mitsui, Morgan Stanley, Sumitomo, UBS, and Wells Fargo. Also welcome the multinational corporations and key institutions, the International Finance Corporation and International Monetary Fund, United Nations, and the World Bank. Today we have for the rating agencies, we have Fitch and SP Global, and Fitch is represented by Saúl del Real. Welcome, Saúl. The universities, we have the American University, Iowa State, Princeton. And the media, El Diario New York, the Financial Times, represented by Michael Stutt. So a great list of participants, and welcome to each and every one of you. Thank you again for your interest in our programs. And please note that the speakers' remarks are their own views and are not expressions of or positions of the Ecuadorian American Association. This is very important for the Q&A. There is a tab at the bottom that you can write your questions throughout the conference, and they will be answered at the end. And now it's my pleasure to present to you the president of the Ecuadorian American Association, Juana Caicedo Selinger. She's the senior vice president at UBS Financial Services in New York. Juana, the floor is all yours.
Thank you very much, Maria Rosa. Welcome, everyone. Thank you to Sebastián Hurtado, Walter Scurrier, Evan Koster, and to you all. I believe it is a fair assessment to say Ecuador is in the midst of one of its most challenging times from an economic and social perspective. On April 13, Ecuador is going to have one of the most important elections in recent times. The presidential runoff election is no doubt in my mind that the result of this election will deeply impact the future of the country, a country that today is trying to deal with enormous drug-related gang violences, unemployment, and lack of economic growth. This afternoon, we have the opportunity to hear from our distinguished panelists about the election and possible results. At the end of the call, there will be devoting time to answer questions from the audience. Now, I would like to introduce you briefly our moderator, who will introduce the speakers. You may refer to the latest invitation for further information about him. Evan Koster is a partner of Baker Botts, head of derivative practice, and a member of capital market securities practice. Evan has 15 years experience in derivatives, commodities, and energy trading, with a distinguished background in financial markets, emerging markets, debt, and sovereign finance transactions. He has represented clients in recent leading sovereign debt restructures, including the Ecuador restructuring in 2020. In 2024, he advised the Ecuadorian government in the historical debt for nature swap. And now Evan will introduce our speaker and begin the discussion. Evan, is all yours. Thank you.
Evan, could you please turn on your microphone?
Sorry about that. It's only about 5 years into doing this, but with Zoom. But I just wanted to say thank you, Juana, and thank you for the introduction. And I wanted to thank the Ecuadorian American Association for hosting this event and for all the work that they do in raising awareness with respect to Ecuador. And the Ecuadorian American community and society. I've been involved with organizations, law firms, and that have been members of the association for over 20 years. In fact, the 15 years that Juana mentioned slightly underestimates my experience in Latin America. But all throughout that time, I've been with organizations who've been members of the association, and they do truly great work. So I encourage attendees, if they're not members, to please contact the association because it's truly worthwhile. Without further ado, I wanted to introduce the speakers. Sebastian Hurtado is the founder of Profitas. He's a political risk professional with over 20 years of experience, works at the intersection between business, government, and society, and he's founder of the political risk consultancy Profitas. He has a degree in economics from Universidad Católica in Quito, and an MBA from UT Austin, and an MBA from the Kennedy School. He regularly publishes commentary in journals such as America's Quarterly and newspapers such as the Financial Times and Washington Post. And directly following Sebastian will be Walter Spurrier Bacarizo. He's an economic analyst, and he's the president of the Spurrier Group. He has a master's degree in political science from UCLA. He's the director of the Political Economic Report Weekly Analysis, and he's also president of the Spurrier Group. He's a columnist for El Comercio and El Universo, and he offers advice, talks, consultancies, and studies in economic and political issues of the Ecuadorian reality. So that is definitely something that we want to hear about. Currently, he's advisor to the Chamber of Industry, and he's at the faculty at Casa Grande University. So Sebastian will begin first, and I encourage attendees after Walter finishes to please send your questions. This is intended to be interactive, and we welcome dialogue. Turn it over to you, Sebastian.
Thank you, Ivan, and good afternoon, everyone. First, I want to thank Maria Rosa and Juana and the Andean American Association for this invitation, and want to thank all of those connected for taking the time to join this timely discussion about this, I would say, unique upcoming Ecuadorian presidential election. First, I would like to start by highlighting key aspects of what I see as an unprecedented political context surrounding the Ecuadorian election. First, except for the case of former President Rafael Correa, who was elected or re-elected twice during his mandate, this is the only other time in Ecuador's recent history where we have an incumbent president running for re-election and with a real chance of winning the election. Second, the election is taking place while Ecuador is facing an unprecedented, and I bet you all are aware of that, an unprecedented security crisis that has turned Ecuador in one of the most violent countries on earth and represents the most pressing concern for most Ecuadorians. Then Ecuador at the same time has a dismal economy, an economy that contracted over 1% in 2024 and that will barely grow in 2025. Actually, Ecuador is the only Andean economy that has contracted on a per capita basis for over 4 years now and faces what is effectively a lost decade in terms of economic growth per capita. Also, Ecuador is living through what I will characterize as an institutional chaos, in the sense that most state institutions are in disarray. Most leaders of state institutions have not properly been named or replaced, or these institutions are in hands of some of people that are just momentarily there. In all these institutions, except I would say for the Constitutional Court, have been significantly deslegitimized in recent years. I think, not I think, it's a fact, there's significant voter frustration with the status quo that I just described. And with the direction of the country, over 70% of Ecuadorians think Ecuador is going in the wrong direction. And there's significant polarization, as the results of the first round election can show. So I think this is a political context that makes this election particularly uncertain. I think the combination of a security crisis, a weak economy and institutions, and political polarizations are fertile ground for very unexpected events and surprises that could significantly change the direction of the election at the last minute. We just have to remember what happened in 2023 after the unfortunate assassination of presidential candidate Fernando Villavicencio. That event completely changed the direction of that election, preventing the Correistas from winning that election in the first round and allowing for other runners like President Noboa to take an advantage and eventually get elected president. Second, I would like to highlight a few key takeaways from the first round election results. One is that historically, sitting Ecuadorian presidents have rarely had a shot at re-election. What makes Noboa's first round election performance really noteworthy in the Ecuadorian contest. Second, the election results from the first round election shows that those voters who were more vulnerable and most affected by the security crisis and by the electricity blackouts that we had last year, in general favored González in the election. González is the Correísta candidate of the election. In contrast, those voters who are in general in a better economic position and were less exposed to the electricity and security crisis that we lived through in the last year were more inclined to support Novoa. And you can see that from the local results of the election. Also, the tight result shows, I mean, we all expected that the election will go into the second round. What I think no one expected is that the result was were that as close as it was. And the tight result of the election shows that Correísmo remains a formidable political force. It is important to understand that that political movement has not held office since 2017. Its leader, former President Rafael Correa, has remained in exile in Europe for over 7 years. And all the governments that have came after Correísmo have actively tried to weaken Correísmo without much result. At the same time, you know, there are really few votes that the two finalist candidates can dispute in the runoff election. You know, turnout in the first round election was relatively high at over 80%, and null and blank votes were not particularly significant. You know, finalists of the election will have a very small pool of votes that they can tap on to win the second or try to win the second election, which makes this second round of election a very competitive election in any case. I will highlight what I consider is a key and very positive result from the first round election. You know, ADN is the political party of President Novoa, and Correísmo, Revolución Ciudadana, which is the political party of Correísmo, will control almost 90% of Congress. We call it National Assembly in Ecuador, leaving most traditional parties very weakened and with marginal representation. This is the first time in recent history that two parties will have an overwhelming control of Congress. And it is the first time in over almost 20 years that a party other than Correísmo achieves such a large bloc as the bloc that ADN from Novoa has achieved. This distribution of power suggests that either Novoa or González will be able to forge a strong working majority along with smaller blocs, providing governability and the unique opportunity to implement long overdue reforms that are necessary to reignite economic growth and address an unprecedented security crisis and other problems. I think Ecuador urgently needs a 4-year government, which we haven't had since the end of Correísmo. We mostly had what having actually interim governments since then. A four-year government is key, and especially a government that can remain in power, and not only remain in power, but is able to advance political reforms and economic reforms. And I think that is within reach for either Novoa or González if they make it to the presidency. What I see as key second round election drivers, you know, there are many factors driving the second round election, but I think there are two key ones. One is security, and the second, significant, for sure, security, you know, is the top concern for most Ecuadorians, way ahead of economic problems. And the second is a significant demand for change among voters who are very frustrated with years of hardship on many fronts. And I think President Novoa has been so far able to leverage those two factors in his favor. First, by positioning himself as the new face in Ecuadorian politics. That's a new kind of politician fighting a very discredited old political class, as he calls it. The fact that he's very young and that he has had a very short term in office also helped him maintain this sort of newcomer profile, this outsider profile that he somehow maintains, even though he's actually the incumbent of this election. I think that positioning was key for him to win the 2023 election, and it's going to be key in this election too. The second factor, but I think even more important, is the reputation of President Noboa as a fighter or a decisive fighter against organized crime. Even though his war that has over a year now against criminal organization has only modestly reduced homicides and other crimes last year, many see that still as progress on what is, as I mentioned, one of the top concerns for voters, which is security. However, the way I see it, Noboa has been losing his standing in both of these factors during this year. On one hand, the security situation has worsened during this year, with national homicide rates reaching record heights again in January and February of this year, and with shocking displays of violence with multiple assassinations at once, the killing of local government officials, and even many children. And even though the worst part of violence is concentrated in specific areas of the country, this significant escalation adds to a general sense of security crisis that is out of control of the government, which I think is negatively impacting Noboa's fighting credentials and providing his opponents with plenty of political ammunition. On the other hand, many recent developments have exposed the Noboa government as not that much different from other governments of the past or from the old political class that Noboa actively criticizes. I can provide a specific example of that. I guess we will be discussing that later, but an example of that is the recent what I think is going to be a failed concession of the Sacha oil field. I think even though regulations allow the president to directly award the concession of such a massive state asset without an open bid process, that process itself has exposed the government to significant political backlash in terms of criticism and suspicion of wrongdoing. And crucially, has made Noboa look like more of the same, since that was the traditional way of governments doing this kind of dealings in the past. And there are other instances that I think have done a lot of damage to this government in terms of making it look like something not very different from what we've had in the past. I think these trends already hurt Noboa in the first round, and I think if not reversed by specific actions, are likely to provide Luisa Gonzalez with an easy win in April if nothing changes. I think both candidates are well aware of these factors and have tried to refocus their strategies in the second round accordingly. Noboa has made a new effort to revamp his security strategy. He made changes in his cabinet. He has promised, he has offered the intervention of foreign security forces in Ecuador, has promised presidential pardons to security forces involved in the war against criminal organizations, and even is offering now cash rewards for the capture of specific criminal leaders. And he, at the same time, has been working on weakening his Correista adversary or Correismo in general. He just this week announced that he's going to provide information that connects politicians with criminal organizations. I think that's going to be aimed at Correistas in an effort to weaken their credentials in terms of fighting criminal organization, which is, as I mentioned, is a key issue. On the other hand, Gonzalez has been heavily criticizing the government for what is a clear spike in criminal activity in Ecuador, and especially in homicides, as I mentioned. And at the same time, Luisa Gonzalez and Coristas are trying to look less radical than many people accuse them of being. Luisa Gonzalez has been meeting, the moderate left-wing leaders in the region, like the new Uruguayan president, the President Luis Ignacio Lula da Silva in Brazil. And she has also been trying, and her team has been trying to reassure international investors, and even her has met the ambassador of the United States in Ecuador, basically saying that the radical past is no more. So they're trying to adjust their strategies in order to just try to leverage those two factors that I mentioned that are going to be key in terms of deciding who's going to win the election. So I would say President Noboa started this election as the favorite, but unless he is able to make progress on the security side, even perceived project by way of some dramatic actions, I would say, and regain his positioning as representing change, which is something that he was based on, Ecuadorians might end up voting for Gonzalez out of just pure frustration with the status quo and even desperation in some cases. I'm running out of time, so I'm going to stop there and leave for the questions some poly implications of the different options of who might win in April. So I'll stop there and
Thank you,
for
Sebastian. I'm going to turn it over to Walter. I just wanted to remind the participants to please send the questions on the Q&A button. And Walter, the floor is yours.
Yeah, thank you very much. It's the results of the first round were a shock to Daniel Noboa. Actually, he didn't go out and claim victory because, after all, he came in first just by 16,000 votes or something like that. He could have said that he got more votes in the first round this time than he did last time around. In other words, he could have tried to convey the image of winning. Instead, he just got into bad mood and locked himself in his room and didn't show up at any of the events that were planned for his to celebrate the results of the first round. That's because the mainstream polls were giving him as a victor. An easy victor in the first round, perhaps winning all right, or otherwise having a comfortable lead that would assure his victory in the runoff in April. Since he has had to change his strategy, he has had to face three big concerns the population had. One, which had been a fairly new concern, was the electric power failures, which was a result of Ecuador over-investing during the Correa years, over-investing in hydroelectricity and neglecting thermal power, and then having a very strong drought. And so we had a very extensive blackouts, and fortunately now it's raining, and there are enough reserves to think that we're not going to have more water outages until after the election, if so, or perhaps at the end of the year. So that issue is gone. The other two issues, the one concerning, as Sebastian noted, the one concerning security. I think Noboa wasn't aware of the extent of the problem when he became president, or he thought it was a good tool to present himself as an easy winner on the drug bans that are running the country now, which is should have been expected because the Colombian governments and the Mexican government neither has been able to control the mafias, and both Colombian and Mexican mafias here in Ecuador, because they have found it as an expedient way to take Colombian drugs to Mexico and then to the US. So it's a very steep battle to which we have to add the Albanians to take they take the drugs to Europe. It's a very tough battle. And then the strategy the president has followed, which is war on the bans, has one important weakness, which is when they capture a band leader, what happens is that different groups within the bands fight among themselves to see who controls the whole group, and that produces more killings or more death. Because when we speak of violence in Ecuador, we first have to see that a great bulk of those who die are drug band members, drug gang members, or innocent bystanders who got killed when they were fighting. The gangs were fighting among themselves. So the president may need to have a big strike to some gangs within the next month or so to win on that front, because as Sebastian indicated, mainly in the coast and in rural areas or in slums in the coast, people are, I mean, fed up with having so much violence and so much gang warfare. Second issue of the economy. And here what the president is trying to do is to increase economic activity, is spending more. Since February, the government is pushing up expenditures, have asked for money from the banks, has spent whatever they have been collecting from taxes, which is they have increased revenue substantially. And what he's running against is that we have the Constitution, 2008 Constitution that was set up by the Correa Group, Correa administration, which is discriminate against private investment. It's very difficult to get business to invest in this environment. Part of the problem with electric power is that it's very difficult for businesses to invest even for their own supply of electric power, because the idea is that it's a state monopoly. So we have unless we change the constitution somehow or another, future governments willing to increase private investment in Ecuador are going to have to fight a very constitution which is very suspicious of anything which is private investment. So he has been trying to improve the economic situation to say, yes, we're coming out of the crisis, vote for me. That's his main task from here until the elections in April. Then Luisa Gonzalez, whose first round of elections was essentially run by Rafael Correa, saying, no, we're coming again. Now in the runoff, he takes a step back. So she would say, I'm going to be president. It's not going to be Correa, and I'm going to be willing to have a more, introduce more groups into my administration, which is highly unlikely. Correa is going to run the government, not Luisa Gonzalez, but that is her campaign right now. It's a toss-up who wins this runoff, and the key issue here is that what Ecuador can expect from either candidate. It's just two completely different roads. If Novoa gets reelected, you can expect him to pretty much follow what he has been doing up to now. He has an agreement with the IMF to adjust the economy, and then he has to bring in the constitutional reforms and legal reforms to be able to attract more capital by private investment, because public investment is very difficult to increase, because Correa left a bloated bureaucracy, and it pretty much eats up all government revenues in spite of increasing taxes. So we could expect him to try to modernize the Ecuadorian economy. We really don't know how effective he would be as president. We don't have much experience with Novoa as a politician. His campaign has been all around social media, TikTok and X and Facebook. It is mainly very brief presentations, mainly to bring sympathy from the electorate, nothing on what his plans for the country are. politicians in Ecuador and other places say that when you speak about the issues, you don't make any votes, you may lose votes. So he hasn't spoken about the issues. But still, you don't know how much of a populist he would be or how much of a reformer, but that's the extent of the differences of what we could expect of the Novoa administration. With González, on the other hand, González has already said that she's going to roll back the increase in VAT, which means essentially that she would stop the program with the IMF. That means no IMF support. They make no secrets that they expect to bankroll government expenditures issuing dollars. Ecuador dollarized at the beginning of the century, mainly because Ecuadorian governments tapped the central bank for lending constantly, and that brought huge inflation and devaluation. So we dollarized to prevent central bank from issuing money. Korea found a way to issue money, issue US dollars. And not, of course, in the printing press, but just transferences from the central bank of dollars that they don't have. And that, of course, if you're going to pump in money that you do not have, that brings the need for the government to close the doors for the exit of dollars, because you cannot have dollars exit because they are not coming in. You are inventing those dollars, and so you have to reduce imports. You have to reduce payments on debt service, payment on the take-home profits from international corporations, paying international credits by private business. In other words, you're going to close down the economy. You would have a short-time period of important growth because of the money you are pumping into the economy, but then you're going to get into economic chaos, and it's something that Korea was not willing to do when he was in power. He issued dollars in 1950. He issued once in 2015, 2016, and then he decided he could not go more on that route, and he left Lenin Moreno as president for Korea to come back later on once Moreno collapsed on the economic crisis. Moreno proved to be a shrewd operator, and Korea has been out of power since. But now that he comes back, he probably goes along that route, and we're going to go in a short period of increased economic expenditures, and then we're going to come into very tough, hard straits of an economy which we have run out of dollars. It may eventually would have to leave dollarization because it would be untenable to have a dollarized economy without dollars coming in. So that's essentially the scenario we're facing right now. And as I said, it's a toss-up who would be in the election. I always thought that Novoa had the upper hand because being president, he has more occasions to make things that would have a big impact on the economy, on public opinion, of all the power of the presidency. But we have not seen any of these big striking measures, initiatives that would increase his support. What has in her favor, Luisa González, is gangs prefer her, of course. The gangs had good times with Korea. In the recent elections, the first people to vote were inmates. And in the first round, we had 16 candidates, and over 90% of the inmates voted for Luisa González. Only 2% voted for Novoa. That gives you an idea where the heart of the gangs is. And of course, the added to violence we're living today is also a way for them to have an impact on the elections, because of course you would have less violence with Korea, since why are the gangs going to encourage violence against the government if they're going to be in the government as they were in the previous Korea administration. So that's and I would agree with what Juanita said. This is a particularly important election. It's I always thought that if Novoa won this election, that would have been the last stand of of Rafael Correa, because for the next elections within 4 years, he would have already been out of power for a long period of time, and the electorate would pretty much forget him, and he would not have the hold on part of the population that he has now. So on the other hand, if he wins now, we probably will have, as I said, break up with the IMF, probably going to a default. That's what the financial markets believe, and the reason why the country risk shut up, and we would be on a steep difficulty. And I will stop it there to give more time for questions.
Thank you, Walter. We did get a couple of questions. I think a few of them have been answered already, but I just wanted to, Walter, you were very clear. You think the election is a toss-up, and I wanted to ask Sebastian directly what, with his crystal ball, if he thinks it's a toss-up, or does he think Gonzalez is going to win?
I agree. I think it is a toss-up at this point. However, as I mentioned, if those key trends that I mentioned in terms of public perception regarding Noboa's fight on criminal organizations or war in criminal organizations, and Noboa's credentials as the guy, the change guy of this election, or the person who represents change in this election. He retains that. He has an edge. If he loses those credentials over the next weeks before the election, as he somehow has been losing over the past couple of months, I think the trends will start favoring Gonzalez. At this point, I think they're tied in the election.
Okay, thanks. One question was asked about voter fraud. I mean, it's a compound question, but if you can comment on voter fraud that was alleged in the first round. Also, and this is for either of you, your assessment about corruption, whether not just perception of either candidate and corruption, but reality in terms of trying to tackle corruption. And finally, how does the prospect of foreign military presence, how does that to reduce the crime, how does that sort of play in the election? I mean, there is an agreement with the U.S. regarding maritime, but there's been some discussion, I think, by the foreign minister of having foreign special forces in Ecuador. So if you can address that and what impact that may have on the election.
Who are you asking, Sebastian or me?
Either one.
Well,
Want to take it, Walter?
I'll start here because, just to alternate replies. Regarding a military presence, I don't know exactly what the government expects, but what I would say as important military presence is not so much presence on land. I would say if we could have help from U.S. Navy, essentially, or an Air Force to patrol the entrances and exits of the Ecuadorian ports, because one of the big problems here is that Ecuador has been a laggard. It's beginning to solve that now, but it's been a laggard in control on the passage of drugs from through ports, because essentially, if drugs are produced in Colombia, why do they have to go out through Ecuadorian ports? It's essentially because they found it easier. So, and then in the port of Guayaquil, when you can control the port, and that's the main ports are in the Gulf of Guayaquil. If you can control those ports, in addition, if you can control that nobody contaminates the cargo and leaving out of the ports is still within the Gulf, that would be a huge step. Part of the problem to the drugs here is because Ecuador is the world's largest exporter of bananas, and bananas is a huge amount, it's a huge volume. Guayaquil ports export as much in weighing containers than Peru does. In other words, that's a much bigger economy, and in terms of containers, we have as much containers and cargo, actually a little bit more than what Callao has. So they do have to control that. About fraud, the government has made charges of fraud, but have never produced evidence. So we do not know if there has been fraud. And I suspect that we may have fraud in the province of Manabí, which is the third largest, and that voted overwhelmingly for Correa in a way that in free elections, you almost never see a candidate drawing so much of the vote in one province in face of the other candidates as Correa had Gonzalez and her lists, congressional list had in Manabí, and Correa pretty much controls the province, and also his party is the best organized party in Ecuador, so they're able to have a better presence in the electoral tables, and for instance, if they have a presence and you don't have equal presence from the other side, the first thing you do is you take all the blank ballots. People did not show up and are in the registered voters. You just vote for your candidate there, and it's very difficult to prove that there was fraud there. So there may have been some fraud, but the government was not able to show that it was fraud, could not prove it, and I don't know if they are better prepared this time around. Corruption in Ecuador in general, there is corruption, but under the Correa administration, it was a corruption organized from the top down. Now you do have corruption in the administration and different levels, and it's very difficult to control. But you do not any longer have a corruption from the top down, as proved by the Attorney General that put the prison sentences against the Correa and his members of the cabinet.
Thank you. Sebastian, do you want to
No,
comment on that?
really quick. I think the possibility. I think foreign forces acting in Ecuadorian soil is very unlikely. Not only, I think that's something the government might want and would like to have, and I think that's something that will provide the government more credentials in their fight against criminal organizations in front of the public. However, I don't see which countries are going to be willing to contribute those forces. I'm pretty sure the Americans won't. What I think is likely is for the Ecuadorian government to have a closer cooperation with other governments and security forces of other countries around maritime activities and intelligence sharing. That's how I think there's room for improvement and for more collaboration in those areas. Regarding fraud, every candidate that has lost an election in Ecuador for the past 50 years have cried fraud, and no one has ever been able to prove fraud. If there are some mistakes or some marginal fraud in some provinces, I think that's marginal and has not made a difference in the elections. And I'm not really expecting for massive fraud to take place in this coming election.
Okay, thank you. So, Sebastian, I think you mentioned the Sacha oil field deal. If I understood correctly, pointing at a situation where, well, though Noboa government and may have criticized the deals that Correa had with the Chinese oil companies, they're actually turning to the same or similar strategy with respect to Sacha. So I wanted to ask Walter if you could expand on the Sacha oil field deal and give your take on is this a situation where Noboa administration or if he wins the runoff may actually also turn to Chinese for investment.
Well, yes. Originally, Sacha, which was one of the three major fields that Ecuador has, and was discovered by Texaco, and has been held by Petroecuador ever since under the Borja administration in the late 80s, but remained in Petroecuador hands, which has never really invested that much, and we're talking about the late 80s. Correa struck a deal with the Venezuelan government, with Hugo Chavez, saying, we're going to operate together in Sacha, and I give you 30% of all production in Sacha, and you will run the Sacha. And PDVSA did a very poor job. The Venezuelans essentially took the 30% of the production, invested very lightly. In addition, the investment was made in junk, in PDVSA junk, the equipment wouldn't work anymore. They dumped it on the Sacha administration, to the point that they had to end that deal, which some estimates place it that Venezuela got something like $400–500 million a year in profits. Now, Novoa, in my view, this is my interpretation. Novoa wanted to increase its revenues, to get money out of for in the short term. So she wanted to contract out Sacha with a premium, a 1.5 billion premium, entrance premium by the company wanted to operate. Now, Ecuador has, as I said, a constitution which is very much against private investment. When, in other words, you can go through a fast track in contracting an operator if it's a state corporation. And the only state corporations that is very active in Ecuador are Chinese. And so that's the reason why they say they discussed this with several companies, and the only one that seemed to be interested was Sinopec. And so that's the reason they struck a deal with Sinopec. We really don't know how is that contract, the economic clauses, because all what we have is what the government has set, that the contract says, and of course they're always going to paint to clean it up, to give a favorable impression what the contract really holds. We really don't know what it holds, but the idea that Novoa wanted was an immediate $1.5 billion entry fee to spend during the campaign. What happens is that they couldn't make it in time, and the contract would be signed and the money received after the election. So that's the reason why Novoa gave an ultimatum that ends today to the joint venture, the Sinopec and its small Canadian ally, which is a Canadian company with Venezuelan executives of the pre Hugo Chavez PDVSA, but this company, this joint venture, I really doubt they're going to give the 1.5 billion before signing the contract that Novoa asks, because if Luisa Gonzalez wins, she's not going to sign the contract, especially if the money has already been spent by Novoa. So right now, probably the joint venture would not pay the funds today, and then after the election, if Novoa wins, he may go ahead and sign the contract, or he may push it off and look for another investor under different terms. Exactly that we don't know. But the reason the Chinese are in is here is exactly that, because the Correa administration contract constitution makes it very difficult to to contract with a private firm unless you go through a very lengthy, time-taking process, which Novoa did not want to follow because he needed the funds now.
Thank you. Just one more question I wanted to direct at Sebastian, and it's a topic that we had two related questions, but it's a topic that I'm familiar with, so I'm going to take the moderator license and have it as the last one to address. It's with respect to sort of capital markets, international markets. One question was, what will happen to the price of Ecuador's external debt if the Correistas win? And also, can the Correistas be pragmatic and work with the IMF, implement fiscal consolidation and not touch the FX reserves? And I through my professional experience, I remember when in 2008 and 2009 there was a default by Ecuador, but came back to the capital markets, I would say, relatively quickly in 2014, and during the remaining years of Korea's government accessed the capital markets pretty frequently. So for Sebastian, if you could address the questions regarding the external debt and also the issue of fiscal and economic pragmatism, in particular with the IMF.
Well, the Coristas are definitely not the preferred choice by international markets. And you can tell that just by taking a look at the premium risk that has been moving up in recent weeks for Ecuadorian debt. And basically, that's because, international observers and investors are looking increasingly likely that, or more possible, that the Correista government will reach power. And, international investors have reasons to doubt the Correistas. At the end of the day, they defaulted on debt when they enter into power. It is hard to tell what are they going to do. Luisa has had some strong statements, but people around her and around her team have been talking to international investors and other people and international analysts and calming them, trying to calm them down in terms of the potential new default. They have even opened the possibility of working with the IMF as long as they can adjust some of the macro goals that have been agreed on the IMF program. I discussing what could happen in a Correista government,
Sorry, Sebastian, I'll give you 30 seconds to wrap up because we're coming close to time. Sorry.
Okay, well, it is hard to understand what's going to happen in the Correista government. I will expect for a Correista government to be, a new Correista government to be as radical as ever on the political side in terms of rebuilding the Correista political order. I would expect for them to be on the economic side more aligned with the second part of Correismo, which I think was more pragmatic. As you mentioned, they came back to international financial markets. They signed a free trade agreement with the European Union. They promoted large-scale mining. So that's what I would expect. I will not expect in these circumstances for the Correistas to be as radical as they were at the beginning of the Correista administration.
Great, thank you. That's real insightful analysis and appreciate it. I wanted to thank both of you, Walter and Sebastian. Definitely a very timely and unpredictable times, but I think it's helpful for both of you to clarify the issues, and we're grateful for that. And I'm going to turn it over to Maria Rosa to close, please.
Yes, thank you so much, Walter Espurriel, Sebastián Hurtado, y Evan Koster. Thank you for giving us the opportunity to listen to your very expert exchange. We will see. Let's wait, and we will have another program afterwards. And right now, I would like to just to update you that we're working with the Trump administration new guidelines for investment in Latin America, and we're working on a program for infrastructure and renewable energy investment. We're not for-profit organization, and our support comes from the membership and the sponsorship. So please join the Ecuadorian American Association via replying to today's invitation. We look forward to seeing you again, and Juana will do the very closing remarks.
Yeah, thank you, Maria Rosa. Again, thank you to our distinguished speakers and moderator for this excellent program. We always have understanding of the situation of Ecuador. I think they clarify a lot of issues, answer many questions. I know it's a difficult topic to discuss. We don't know what's going to happen, what the future brings, but hopefully the election goes okay, and let's see what happens. I also would like to congratulate Alexandra Vaquerizo and Linda Calvet for the great job organizing this program. And thank you again to all of you for being here with us today, and I hope to see you in the future programs. Thank you.
Good.
Thank you,
Thank you.
muchas gracias. Buenas tardes. Excelente.